Hi, I'm Em.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Hey Bea, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm really good, because I'm very excited for this episode. This episode is us maniacally talking about our favorite fics that are over 50k, or 50,000 words.
Which means lots of words, lots of story, lots to be excited about.
Yes, I just wanted to have a couple of things up front. So for everybody listening, please note that there will be general spoilers for every fic that we talk about in this episode. We're not going to just talk about the fics just bare bones and then nothing else. We kind of want to dive into the story itself and kind of story in general. So that means that we're going to be talking about the fics in depth, and there will be spoilers. So fair warning, if you guys find in the show notes a fic that you would like to read, maybe stop listening and read it, and then come back and listen. Or if you just want to listen to us soliloquize about story in general and you don't care, please listen. It's great.
So the reason that we chose fics over 50k is because that's well over the sort of well-accepted word count definition for what a novel is. So everything that we're talking about is basically a novel that we read for free.
It's true. Yeah, the general consensus online, at least, is a novel is generally over 40k, over 40,000 words, and some of the recs that we're recking right now are 4 times that. So and I have read fics in the last week over 10 times that. So maybe they aren't quite as well put together comparatively to a published novel, but we get to read whole novels and more for free online, and that's great about fanfic. That's a great thing about fanfiction. Anyway, we think that these recs we think these recs are really good examples of kind of running joke in fandom, where it's a lot easier to read fic than anything else. So you can read a 2,000 word essay for school and hate it, but then read 200,000 words for fic and it's 3 a.m. So Bea, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think I've mentioned this before, but my absolute guilty pleasure in fandom is time travel fix-it AUs, and this first rec is 100% a time travel fix-it AU. So it is called Backslide by Blackcat, and it is in the Naruto fandom. It is a fic in which everything in the Naruto canon goes up to pretty much the end of the series, but in the war at the end of the series with Kaguya and Madara, everything goes even worse than in canon, and they lose. And it is only Naruto and Sasuke left. And they end up sending Naruto back in time to try and fix things before they ever get this bad. And Sasuke ends up dying in the future. So he is alone in the past, and he no longer is able to get back to the future, and he doesn't know anybody, and he's just trying to save the world. The story itself centers on him after he has done some of the sort of bounty hunting required to get rid of the bad guys who are going to incite the end of the world. He ends up getting pulled back to Konoha, and he ends up getting pulled back specifically to Team 7 and Kakashi and his younger self and younger Sasuke and younger Sakura. For all that it is sort of a sad premise, it's more about him learning how to live again and how to find joy, and him rediscovering what he was saving everybody for them to be happy and for them to grow up unburdened by the things that he had to face in his life. And it helps that he knows all of the bad guys and has measures to take them out. And I don't know if this will frustrate anybody, but the end pairing is future Naruto and Kakashi, which I have a problem with that pairing when it is them as their canon ages, but when it is a future version of Naruto, I think it's actually really cute. it also helps that it has beautiful language. I love the language in this fic. I love the language in a lot of the Naruto fics that blackcat writes. I personally am not a huge Naruto fan. I'm not very much in the fandom. And this is one of those fics that I keep coming back to because the way they describe canon is, to me, so much more beautiful and heartbreaking and complicated than what I see in the show.
Quick question. Because Naruto is from the future and he's able to know exactly how to defeat the monsters and the problems that they have, would you consider him very OP?
I want to say yes, sometimes. Because he's able to anticipate certain things and just take care of other problems. But at the same time, the way blackcat writes him, he's so very, very human. And he has all of these plans that end up working out because he spent so much time and effort constructing them. But when things don't go to plan, he has to sort of think on his feet, and there are sacrifices or compromises that he makes. Kind of near the end of the fic, they address the wave arc, which, for those of you who are not familiar with Naruto, basically Naruto and his team get sent on a mission that they think is easier than it ends up being, and they end up facing some enemies they weren't expecting along the way, and they end up defeating the enemies, but it's sort of bittersweet because Naruto forms a connection with one of these enemies while they're in disguise, Haku, and learns some valuable life lessons from him, but he ends up dying, and so
Haku?
Haku. So future Naruto comes back and decides, sort of spur of the moment, outside of his plans, that he's going to try really hard to save them, because that's two more people that didn't die and he wants to save everybody. So he doesn't plan for this, and what ends up happening is he gets sent away on a mission and it goes south. And when he comes back, the team has already gone on the wave mission. And so he has to scramble to try and save them, save their enemies, well, half a country away. And it doesn't work out ideally, but it ends up working out well. So it's a fix it. It's a fix it where things go well, and it's not ultimately super complicated. I feel like it's more of a character piece than a plotty piece. So take that for what it's worth. This is a quote from the middle of the fic, after Kakashi sort of realizes that he's fallen in love with future Naruto, who in this fic is called Kurama, for some reasons that they explain. And so it's the middle of the night, and Kakashi wanders out, and there's this scene where Kurama is sitting in the kitchen with the window open, I believe. So it's, Kurama had a sort of drama to him, not in the way of dramatics or hysterics, but in the way that a sweeping sense of emotion hangs about him. Something as subtle and breathtaking as the most wrenching scene in a very good movie. Kurama is cheer and mischief and kindness, but then he stops, and suddenly he's the kind of creature that poets write ballads about. Something great and terrible and sad and fiercely joyful all at once.
Their writing is very impactful. Yeah. Now I want to know more about Kurama. So, my first one is called Faster Than a Speeding Bentley by nightbloomingcereus. It's 72,000 words long. It's actually Good Omens' Ineffable Husbands AU. Ineffable Husbands is the ship name for Aziraphale and Crowley from Good Omens, written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Neil Gaiman is like my favorite author, so it just goes to show that I love the fanfic of his books. It's a very fun AU. I think I might just read the summary. A mysterious explosion, an intrepid reporter who asks too many questions, a bite from a small, seemingly innocuous garter snake. You know the drill. But Anthony J. Crowley soon finds out that being a superhero isn't all that's cracked up to be. Sure, there are benefits. Being able to slither up the sides of buildings, doing really weird things with his tongue, the occasional lucrative stock tip from a grateful rescuee, and gloating over the fact that a simple pair of sunglasses is an apparently impenetrable disguise. On the other hand, there's the sheer indignity of spandex, a succession of increasingly terrible monikers, and the fact that he keeps making a fool of himself in front of the love of his life, who, for some reason, seems to keep getting kidnapped. and to add insult to injury, said love of his life might just be in love with his alter ego. It isn't easy being the serpent. It kind of reminds me of Superman. If Superman had the powers of a snake instead. So Crowley is the serpent. But Aziraphale is the love of his life, and they both work at this newspaper, and Crowley is like into like, you know, violent journalistic stuff, and Aziraphale does the cooking section, and it is just so sweet, and they know each other for like 10 years while Crowley is also the serpent, and Aziraphale also has powers at the end, and it's like really cool and fun. I actually just read it, and the last chapter, the epilogue, just came out this week, so perfect timing, really. But the writing is really funny, and the relationship between Crowley and Aziraphale is just so lovely. I couldn't stop reading it, and every time the author decided to update it, it made my week. So I thought I would rec it, and I really do love it. I might read the quote here that I have.
Mm-hmm.
The best secrets were mostly true, and Crowley was nothing if not an expert at secrets. He had actually lost concentration and fallen off a wall last night, but it was not located in a gym, with harnesses and foam padding and spotters to save him in case of a fall. No, the wall in question had been made of crumbling brick and comprised one side of the exterior of the dilapidated warehouse behind the club, with nothing but unforgiving hard concrete pavement at the bottom. He had, luckily, managed to catch himself on a window ledge after falling 10 feet or so, but not before scraping the soft exposed flesh of his face across a jagged, protruding bit of mortar. It had been worth it, though, to be able to drop down silently behind the would-be assailant, who had been scared satisfyingly shitless by the sight of his yellow snake eyes flashing right before he brought the tire iron down on the man's head with inhuman speed. That's a quote from chapter 1. And it really tracks, too, because tire iron is kind of something that a lot of people like to draw Crowley with. It's at the end of the book and also the end of the miniseries by BBC and Amazon Prime. And he's holding a tire iron because he loves his car. He's holding it to try and defend the world against demons and angels, and it's really wonderful. If you haven't watched the original canon, please watch it. It's great. But this is a really fun introduction to the world of fandom and fanfic for Good Omens, I would say.
So it says that Aziraphale is the love of his life. Mm-hmm. Is he like Lois Lane, like a coworker, or
yes, he does the cooking section for the newspaper. He goes to restaurants and tries them out and then reviews them. But they're not in a relationship the entire time. It isn't until, shocker, Aziraphale finds out he's the serpent at the end of the fic that they actually get together.
So it says that Aziraphale keeps getting kidnapped. So there are super villains in this world.
Okay, so the villains are actually the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but they're kind of humanized. There was an explosion downtown one night, and Crowley got there first because he's an intrepid reporter, who gets to places, and coincidentally, by chance, he was there near the docks that night, and he got bit by the garter snake in the building. But the explosion kind of had this mist that also made other people get powers. Some of them turned evil and some of them became heroes.
Very Static Shock of them.
Yeah, actually. So there are these 4 people that kind of got together and they're trying to murder all of the heroes, all the people who got affected or infected, if you will. So it's very fun reading how the author decided to make them terrifying but more human, as opposed to in the canon they're kind of just like beings that have very specific traits. Yeah, it's really neat. Please, drinking game, don't drink or don't take a shot every time I say the word good or neat, please. Oh my god. Okay, so I think you should go next.
Okay, so my next one, if you noticed that I liked Fix-Its, then you're gonna notice a theme here. The fic that I'm reading is Stages of Hope by Kaylee Silverstorm, and it is, well, I'll read the summary. Professor Sirius Black, head of Slytherin House, is confused. Who are these two strangers found at Hogwarts, and why does one of them claim to be the son of Lily Lupin and that git, James Potter? Which doesn't tell you a whole lot about what the story is, but in essence, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger end up getting vaulted from a bad end universe where the war on Voldemort goes much worse and many more people die. While they're trying to steal the cup from Bellatrix's vault, they have a magical mishap that launches them into a nearby alternate universe where Sirius Black and Remus Lupin end up being friends with Severus Snape and Lily Evans, and from there things change. It's a really interesting fic because it has shades of things that you recognize, while at the same time being just different enough that it catches you flat-footed every now and again. You can take or leave the alternate universe as it stands. The best thing about it, in my opinion, is the way that this particular author plays what is the alternate version of the Marauders with Sirius, Remus, Severus, and Lily off of the dimensional travelers who end up being Harry, Hermione, Neville, and Luna. Each of the characters that we know that have come from this worse world end up interacting with one of them in a way that sort of brings out some of their struggles and their hopes, and it teaches the people in this alternate universe who have not had to face the same adversity a little bit about compassion, I guess. So Harry is sort of played off of Lily, because in this world she's married to Remus and they didn't end up being able to have children for some reasons. And so he's playing off of her in a way that is her trying valiantly to understand him, who is traumatized and kind of insane, but obviously very driven and very powerful, and obviously with his own agenda. And he's trying to understand this woman who could have been his mother, but very much isn't. And him and her trying to choose where they stand, what kind of relationship they have. This is further complicated by the fact that it's made very clear that in this alternate bad end universe that the four dimension travelers are from, they have figured out that at some point Harry is going to have to die in order to defeat Voldemort. So he's having to struggle with, do I even bother to get attached? This is not something, though, that they tell everybody in this alternate world. Neville is played off of Sirius because in this world, Neville had been the boy who lived, and Sirius had been his godfather, and they had had a very close relationship, but then the Neville of this world died. And so Sirius is like, hey, we're gonna have a relationship. I got my godson back. I'm super excited. And Neville is like, I am not the chosen one. I am not who you think I am. I'm a very different person, and I'm a very strong, very capable person, but you need to let go. Hermione and Severus are played off of each other because they're both very, very smart, and in this one, Hermione is very traumatized. Severus is trying to sort of understand this incredibly intelligent young woman who is holding herself and her team together by threads, and yet is still so amazing, and him sort of realizing that no matter what his life is, he doesn't necessarily understand their suffering. But the most interesting one, and my favorite one, is Luna and Remus, because Remus is sort of baffled by the whole thing. You get the feeling that he doesn't necessarily want to be involved, and Luna is, I don't want to say the heart of this group, but she's their innocence. She is the person who holds on to the things that they've lost and tries to turn it into whatever she can into a good thing. And so she's the one who is trying to explain to Remus in her own Luna-ish way what their lives are and why it's not all bad, but it's not all good either.
I'd say that Luna's the heart of the books, too.
Yeah.
So, Sirius, Remus, Lily, and Severus, they're older. They're like how old they would have been in our books, like this reality's books, when Harry is 17 in his 7th year, right?
Mm-hmm. It's
gotcha.
Not, I don't believe explicitly stated one way or the other, but it's implied that there's no time difference between the two worlds, that it's, I think, 1995 in both worlds, whatever the last book was supposed to be set in. It's just,
I thought it was 93, but I could be wrong.
Whatever year it was supposed to be. Sometime in the 90s.
So this is like the truest of true alternate universes.
Mm-hmm. It is literally an alternate universe. Kind of an alternate universe sandwich.
It's like an alternate universe, but I would say it's canon divergence.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's kind of canon compliant.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It ends up not turning out that way, and this is where the is it or isn't it a fix it, because these time travelers come to this alternate universe, and obviously they know about the Horcruxes and they know where to go to get them roughly, and they're very, very good at war at this point in a world that has not seen the open warfare that they have. So they just go about their business sort of destroying them and then telling everybody what they need to know to end the war before it ever begins.
Oh
But
my gosh.
they end up also going back to their own universe to finish their war. So it's a very bittersweet ending in a lot of respects, but it's interesting in that it's this take on these characters that I really loved.
You might have already said this, but where's James again?
I did not say. So in this alternate universe, James Potter obviously never had the Marauders as his friends. And so it's heavily implied that he never grew up to be the same man, and he sort of has gone off to do his own thing. He's still, I believe, part of the Order of the Phoenix, but he's a very different person. He is not a particularly nice person, and I think he shows up once briefly and then leaves. And it's mainly there to illustrate, again, for Harry, this man could have been my father, that boy could have been me, but because James comes with his son. Ultimately, I'm a very, very different person, and that is not my father.
It's weird. This fic sounds like you have to familiarize yourself with the histories of two separate AUs.
They do tell you the backstory, but they do it in this way that I adore, because it's Luna explaining to Remus, and then the other characters do a smattering of their own history here and there, but really you understand what happens from Luna, and she tells Remus this in the form of a fairy tale. It's one of my favorite things about this fic. And it goes, once upon a time there were 4 children. One boy that had only a toad as a friend. One boy that had grown up in an ocean of red hair and never really learned to swim. One boy that had been hidden away in a cupboard. And one girl that spent all her time in an enchanted castle made out of books. When their chest cavities were ready to release their hearts into the wild, they met on a journey. It was, of course, a magical journey. The magical journey would take them to a magical castle, where they would find their true family, and of course they were excited. But what they didn't know was that it was also taking them towards a monster that had been lying in wait for years, hiding in the woods and sniffing for tender young hearts to devour. And while their journey was carrying them closer and closer to the magical place, the monster was scenting for them, closing in. On their journey, the 4 children met 2 other girls, one that was a 7th daughter of a 7th son, and one that could see things no one else could. Both had been laughed at, and so were very lonely, but their chest cavities too were straining to release the hearts they had grown, and so when they met the 3 boys and the girl, they were not afraid. They did not know that all hearts must break, you see. But then the monster came, and it roared and huffed and puffed until the magical castle was blown all to pieces, and all the boys and girls were tumbling helter-skelter and lying on the grass like dolls without their strings. And the monster stomped up to the 3 boys and the 3 girls, and in a terrible voice it shouted, "I am the great evil monster, and you 6 will not stand against me. I have eaten fathers and mothers. I have eaten your brothers and sisters. I have eaten your friends, and you can do nothing to stop me. Your power is not great enough." But the boy who had only a toad as friend stood firm, and he released his heart, and it was a heart of strength. "I will stand against you, even though I am just a small boy," he said. And the boy who had grown up in a sea of red hair stood firm, and he released his heart, and it was a loyal heart. "I will never leave my friends," he said. And the girl who was the 7th daughter of a 7th son stood firm, and she released her heart, and it was a heart of courage. "I will fight you till the end of the world," she said. And the girl that could see things others couldn't stood firm, and she released her heart, and it was a heart of vision. "I see you," she said, "and I'll never forget what you did to us." And the girl that had lived in an enchanted castle, made out of books, stood firm, and she released her heart, and it was a heart of wisdom. "I'll trick you," she said. "All your power is no match for cleverness." But the monster laughed at them, and it reached out for their hearts and crushed 2 of them, and would have crushed all of them, when the last boy stepped forward. "No," he said, and stood firm, and he released his heart, and it was made of the greatest love the world had ever seen. "This love is your death, monster," he said, "and we will die together." And he embraced the monster despite its terrible teeth and claws, and his love burned hotter than all the sun, and together they died.
There's a reason why fables are still said to children and others. It's such simple language, but it's so strong. That kind of made me tear up a little bit. That really also reminds me of Hermione talking about the fable in the actual book series.
That is my favorite part about it, is that particular fairy tale, because I felt that it was such a strong way to explain the history of these people and why they were sort of the hope for this new universe and why they could make things better. So what is your next fic?
Okay, fair warning. This next fic is not done. It is a whip, a work in progress. And I'm very sad that it is because there's only one chapter left, but it was last updated in 2018. So if you can deal with not having a concluded ending, please read it. It's lovely and fun. You'll find that a lot of my fics are pretty lighthearted as opposed to Bea's. All of mine are funny. There's one that's a little angsty, but anyway. So this next one is The Dread Pirate Ladybug by Lycanpictus77. I think that's how you pronounce that username. It is a Miraculous Ladybug and the Princess Bride crossover AU, but specifically the Princess Bride book by S. Morgenstern. The book is slightly different than the film, but they are very close to each other, so if you only know the movie, this might still be really fun for you to read. This is Miraculous Ladybug, which is a Korean, Parisian, anime-esque superhero TV show.
A French magical girl.
Yeah. It's about a French magical girl, and there are these things called kwamis, and yeah, anyway, crossovers, you kind of have to know about both in order to really like the fic itself, but let me just read you the summary. Adrian Agreste lived out a pastoral youth beside his true love until tragedy struck. 5 years have done little to dull the pain, and Adrian finds himself engaged to a woman he doesn't love, heir to the throne of their small kingdom. Meanwhile, rumors are stirring that the dread pirate Ladybug is marauding up and down the coastline, and a small band of mercenaries sets its plan in motion. If you know anything about The Princess Bride, that probably sounds really familiar. So in Miraculous Ladybug, it's between two people. The famous ship is between Marionette and Adrian. Adrian is Chat Noir and Marionette is Miraculous Ladybug. So in this fic, there aren't any like superpowers or anything like that. It's a Princess Bride crossover. But Adrian is Buttercup and Marionette is Wesley, who in the movie he's the Dread Pirate Roberts, but here she's the Dread Pirate Ladybug. And for me, I love that the author decided to put the gender, like, they didn't care what the genders of these characters were in the original film. They were just gonna put who they thought would be good in each role. And Adrian is a perfect Buttercup. In the show, he's a model, so he's considered very beautiful, and Buttercup is considered like, you know, the most beautiful woman in the entire world, definitively by the author. I would say get through chapter 1, and then the rest of it is so fun. So Alia Césaire is Inigo Montoya. She's the best sword player in the world. Or swordist, I guess. She's very good with a sword. Nino is the giant Fezzik, and Papillon, who is the villain in Miraculous Ladybug, he is Vizzini, the head of the three mercenaries. So it's very tongue-in-cheek, just like the book and the film, but if you know Miraculous Ladybug, it's super fun seeing these characters in these roles in The Princess Bride. The author really makes Marionette a badass as the Dread Pirate Ladybug. She wears all red, and I was reading some of the author's notes after some chapters, and the author was saying that in like real maritime history, pirates, as a way to say, hey, we're gonna board you and we're gonna kill all of you, they put up a red flag as opposed to the bones. The bones meant like parley, like you can surrender when we get on board and we won't murder you guys. We'll just steal from you. Because she's wearing all red as a character, it indicates she takes no prisoners. And I think that the reason why I've wrecked this fic, even though it is a whip, and even though it might be from titles and shows that you may not recognize, there is a specific scene in chapter 8. It is the reunion between Adrian and Marionette, and man, it literally kills me. I reread it today, and it still makes me tear up a little bit. I'm a whore for reunion scenes, and also hurt comfort fics, and this is kind of both of them at the same time. I think that the author must know about uniting with another person after not seeing them for a long time, because it really does hit the heart.
So you said Papillon is Fezzik?
No, Papillon is Vizzini.
sorry, Vicini. Spoilers for Ladybug. Does that mean that he is still Monsieur Agreste, or
No, he's not.
okay?
Mm-mm. Actually, we don't know. Kind of like how Wesley in The Princess Bride, we don't know his lineage. We don't know his parents. We don't know Marionette's parents. Like it's you would think based on the very beginning of the fic that Marionette is supposed to be Buttercup and Adrian is supposed to be Wesley, but it's not. It's the other way around. Marionette still has her parents, and we don't know about Adrian's lineage. I would say no. the
I mean, there's something inherently funny about that.
that Papillon is still his father.
Mm-hmm. But neither of them know.
Well, his love murders him. So, yeah, it would be hilarious, but I don't think so. He's ridiculous.
So if Papillon is Vicini, who is Prince Humperdinck? Are they not the main villain?
No, they are. So, what's cool about this whole fic is that everybody is flipped. Chloe is Prince Humperdinck. It works. She really just wants. She's kind of that weird character like Prince Humperdinck, but all she really wants is to be the most beautiful person in the world. And the only reason why she wants to marry Adrian is because he's beautiful. Anyway, let me read the quote. It's about Alia, by the way. 7 long years, full of hardship and sleepless nights and blistered hands that gave way to rough calluses, studying until her vision blurred and her legs shook and her arms buzzed with exhaustion. 7 years of preparing herself physically, mentally, of training her agility and her reasoning and her stamina. At the end of these 7 years, Alia began the track down. She had it all carefully prepared in her mind. She would find the 6-fingered woman. She would go up to her. She would say simply, "Hello, my name is Alia Césaire. You killed my mother. Prepare to die." And then, oh then, the duel. It was a lovely plan, really. Simple, direct, no frills. In the beginning, Alia had all kinds of wild vengeance notions, but gradually simplicity had seemed the better way. Originally, she had all kinds of little plays worked out in her mind. The enemy would weep and beg, the enemy would cringe and cry, the enemy would bribe and slobber and act disgracefully. But eventually, these two gave way in her mind to simplicity. The enemy would simply say, "Oh, yes, I remember killing her. I'll be only too delighted to kill you as well." Alia had only one problem. She could not find the enemy. That's a quote from chapter 4, which is one of my favorite chapters in the fic. It's all about Alia growing up with her mother, who is this very famed sword creator. It's a lot like the book, I would say. Really good stuff. High recommend. Really fun, really funny, and there's a scene in there that wrecks my heart every time I reread it.
So my next rec is Those Are the Days That Bind Us by Sam. The story is a Teen Wolf fic, and the premise is that after the Nogetsune arc, which if you watch Teen Wolf, you know is an arc where there is an evil kitsune creature that ends up possessing the character Styles and sort of forcing him to do bad things, and they end up having to defeat it at great personal cost. It's a little bit of a turning point for the series because some of the main cast is killed off and other characters come in. Well, in this fic, after all that happens and they start into their next arc, where again some suspicion is being thrown on Styles because of all of the stuff that had gone down, and some of his relationships, particularly with his father, are fracturing. This author premises that instead of sort of patching things up and going back to the show's status quo, what if everybody just sort of collectively loses some faith in Styles and Styles decides that he's going to leave? Styles is told that he has some kinds of magic power, but it's something that their magic user slash information broker in the show, Deaton, can't or won't help him with. So Styles ends up running away. He ends up going on this journey where he meets some people who are willing to teach him how to use his magic, even if they have slightly different kind of magic, because the way that in this fic magic is described is it's not like D&D where you're have illusion magic or clerical magic. It's not really domains. It's not elemental. It's you have attributes that describe your magic, and everything that you do is sort of defined by them. For example, Styles' attributes are dry blood and broken bone, hard earth and dead root, winter skies, and black decay. So, not good things, but sharp, hard things. So, he can't do things like grow plants or heal, but he's good at fighting. He's good at cleansing infection and sort of doing all of those things related to death and decay that end up making a better, brighter world, the darker bits. And he has people who teach him how to do this magic, and he goes out and he decides that he's going to become kind of a magical bounty hunter, but also somebody who's doing everything within his power to keep the peace among these different factions that exist in the world, because in the Teen Wolf universe there's obviously werewolves, hunters, and a whole bunch of other nasty creatures that you see in the show, but presumably other kinds of creatures. There's also Kitsune and Banshee that exist out there who are just sort of living their lives, and hunters are there to kill off the things that are making a problem, but they sometimes have a little bit of a vendetta against the things they hunt. The things that are hunted obviously have a vendetta because they don't want to be hunted. That's a main tenet of the show. And so Styles sort of bridges the gap where he uses magic and he makes friends with a lot of magical peoples and creatures, but also he will hunt down those that need to be hunted. And he's doing this while everybody else in his life, for the most part, doesn't have any idea what he's doing or where he is, except for the fact that he calls his dad's answering machine and leaves messages. And then he comes back to Beacon Hills, and it's about him reforming his relationships and also having people realize that he is not only capable, but he is very, very good at what he does. And it's okay to start trying to build a new kind of relationship based on the fact that he's not the weak link at all, if he ever was. It's a more serious story, and it's dark, not to squeak anybody out, but the thing that wraps up this story is the fact that he has been rebuilding his relationships, but he still lives elsewhere when he gets a call in the middle of the night, and one of his friends, oh, this is also an AU that switches up some of the characters who lives, who dies. So in season 2, I believe, the characters Erica and Boyd both get killed off. In this AU, they don't. And in this AU, he gets called in the middle of the night, and Erica, who was pregnant, has something going terribly, terribly wrong, and they think it's magical, and they need him to get there. So he makes it happen, and he gets there, and it turns out that she has become the latest in a string of victims of this insane necromancer who is this sort of magical serial killer, but she's been attacking pregnant mothers from all these different species. She had been captured and been given to this organization to either rehabilitate or imprison for the rest of her natural life, and she got released, and she's been doing it again. So Styles ends up being able to save Erica, but not her baby, and ends up having to hunt her down, this necromancer down. And it's kind of a heartbreaking story because you learn that this woman, her whole entire idea was that she was going to find a way to have the woman she loved with all her heart be reborn. So she's been doing all of these terrible things because she just wants the love of her life back, and she ends up killing herself doing it. And it's tragic because Styles still treats her gently and with respect in her death, even though she was this terrible, horrible serial killer. So dark stuff, but an interesting take, and I like the way that they take time to address long-held hurts and letting things go, but not being a pushover, not just letting bygones be bygones because it makes you a bigger person, but because you've thought about it, because you choose to forgive or not.
Did you say it was a hysteric fic?
Technically, although most of it is about Styles going off doing his own thing, and the hysteric comes up in the last quarter at best. It's very clearly there, it's very explicitly there, but it's at the very end.
Huh. I love Dark Styles because he's such the heart of the original canon. He faces all of these bad concepts and people, and he brings such levity to the show. One of my favorite things is when a happy character just goes off the rails. Maybe it's because I'm normally really happy. And I don't feel that I necessarily get to be angry all the time. That, like, when I see that happen in fic, I'm just like, fuck yeah, you go! This is the right time to explode. Go at your 10 styles, okay? Go to your 10. It's just, there's something tasty about that. Anyway.
I also just like the fact that he's an extremely competent person without feeling like he's been Mary sued or just generally made overpowered. He still has these extreme limits, and he doesn't always do everything right. Like, it's pretty explicitly addressed in the fic that running away literally from his problems was not a good move, and not having any two-way contact for a lot of years, not a good move. The only reason he actually goes back to Beacon Hills is because he ends up in a bad situation with the fairy court, and the fairy court decides to camp out in his hometown to force him to come deal with them. He would not have come back otherwise, and that is not great either.
That sounds really cool and kind of creepy.
It is
creepy.
The world building, I would say, is one of the stronger points, because it really expands the Teen Wolf world to feel like it's part of a bigger ecosystem.
Funnily enough, my next fic rec is a rec that I put on here because of the world building.
Let's hear it then. I am excited.
This is just a fic that has been in my head ever since I read it. It is Castle on a Cloud by whelvenwings, I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a Destiel fantasy AU. I am not somebody who reads fantasy. I don't really like going into deep fantasy series where you kind of have to learn an entire language in order to get by. I don't like Lord of the Rings. I don't like Game of Thrones. It's hard for me. This is kind of the most fantasy-like thing that I will read. And if you are an avid fantasy person and you read this fic, you're going to be like, wow, you really don't like fantasy, because this is not the most fantasy thing in the world. But let me just read out the summary. Dean Winchester has his whole life planned out. Becoming a warrior is all he's ever dreamed about since he was tiny. Saving people, hunting monsters, quests and deeds and swords and glory. He's done his training and he's ready to become a Ceviche, a knight of the realm. All that stands in his way is the vigil, a night-long contemplation of his past and future in the chapel just outside the city walls. The only rules: no eating, no speaking, and no opening the door. Easy, right? Very easy, until there's a knocking, and a voice from outside that pleads for his help. So begins Dean's journey, and his path will take him far, across the desert, through the forests, over the mountains and beyond. But his mysterious blue-eyed companion is keeping secrets, and Dean has a few of his own. Will he be able to let go of his fear before they come to the castle on a cloud? It's an older fic, and you can kind of tell from the summary, I would say. It is Destiel. So when I was reading this for the first time, I did not realize that the author actually was inspired by watching Avatar The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. And I love Avatar The Last Airbender. But you can totally tell that they were inspired by Avatar The Last Airbender because Castiel is a waterbender and Dean is a firebender. And it's very 2015. But I would say that the world building of this fic is super fun because it's kind of like... it's between two countries that are really close together and they have disparate ideas about how the world works, right? And that's basically every fantasy ever. But there's the southern area where the firebenders are and the northern area where all the waterbenders are. The spoilers, okay. Dean is the prince of this country, and even as like a reader you don't know this until the middle of the fic. So it's really fun figuring out not only that Dean was hiding something from even the reader, but also hiding it from Cass. And they save each other, and I will say it's quite explicit. There are 3 or 4 sex scenes in it. Generally, with this one, I kind of skip it because they're a little bit not awesome. No offense to the author. I don't really tend to read sex scenes all that often anyway, so no shade to the author or anything like that. But the rest of it's super fun. There's even like a detailed dictionary and pronunciation guide at the end of the fic, and it's enough words that are different from English and made up for the fic that it feels fantasy, but it's not enough that would like it distracts me from reading it. It's very cool. It's these two people who are open enough to figure out how to communicate with each other from two very disparate cultures. It works like really well. They're so themselves, but they're set in fantasy and from two different cultures, and I think it's really awesome.
So I have to ask, the title prompted me. Does it have anything to do with Les Mis?
No, it doesn't. Actually, when I was looking up the fic, I kept seeing Les Mis AUs and stuff like that. No, it's a term for the castle that exists in the water people's lands. It's like an ice castle, and
Cool.
they there's like a big cloud underneath the castle. It is very cool how the author describes it. The author did a really good job at detailing, describing, figuring out kind of the perfect adventure story. They keep running into problems, but like because of each problem they get closer and closer and closer together, and it's not perfect, but it's a fun romp, I will say. It's only 122k, and by what I mean, like, only, yeah. It is. I read huge long fics, so that's definitely skewed, but I read it in 3 or 4 hours, and it's really nice. It's a really good fic.
So you mentioned that there's waterbenders and firebenders, and I might have missed
Yeah.
this. Are there earth and air too?
No.
Like in okay.
No, there's not even a hint of that. I think it would be kind of cool if there was another companion work where they figure out that they were so insular with each other that like not even their cultures realized that there were air and earthbenders around them. But fire and water are just so opposite of each other, and that's, I think, why the author didn't want to introduce other benders. It's a very small, like, they traverse large areas, open areas in the fic, but in their countries, but like it's very insular. Okay, your final one.
My final one. The
Oh
one that is not serious. This one is the opposite of serious. It is called Dishonor on Your Cow by Mandarou. It is probably about as close as I am comfortable reading most of the time to crack fic. It is hilarious and a little bit off the wall and explicitly and blatantly filled with tropes, but the entire thing is handled sort of tongue-in-cheek, and it has enough plot that it's actually tons of fun to read. If you want to know the tone, they have so many tags, and they are all wonderful. Some of the highlights being Cuddle Spores, Steve You Ding Dong, that is an actual tag, Sassy Sea Salt Cupcake Bucky Barnes, and Deus Ex Buckina, which, for all of you who don't know, is a reference to the trope Deus Ex Machina, in which something miraculous comes and fixes the problem at the end of the plot. So the story centers around Steve, Rogers, and Bucky Barnes, but in this story, Steve is the Captain America that you know from the first Avenger and the Avengers movie, but Bucky is not from the 40s. Bucky is modern, and he's an army sergeant who, during the Battle of New York, when the Chitauri aliens are coming to destroy everything, he and his squad end up pulling out all the stops and coming to help the Avengers. Nobody knows initially who he is because he wears a bandana over his face, and everybody for the first little bit just calls him Hot Bandana Guy. So Bucky and his team end up helping the Avengers, but when everything is all said and done, Steve overhears him taking credit for everything that his team had done during the invasion, and he thought that he was being a braggart and sort of leaving his team out to dry. But it turns out that Bucky's team was getting in massive trouble for helping, and he was taking all the blame. So Steve says some things that he later very much regrets when he realized what happens, and Bucky gets dismissed from the army and sort of disappears into the wind. So Steve thereafter tries desperately to find Bucky, who he doesn't know who he is other than Hot Bandana Guy, but nobody can find anything about him. So you get a really funny scene where they're trying to discuss this. Who is Hot Bandana Guy? Thor asked carefully. Is he a new threat? No, Steve said decisively. Clint and Bruce both made wavering gestures with their hands and made noises in answer. So, I think we definitely need to consider this Barnes guy a threat, Natasha announced as the elevator door opened and she strolled in with the tablet in her hand. Steve banged his head against the table again. It's things like that throughout the fic that just make it really charming to read. I have reread it more than once. It makes me laugh every time. One of my hands down favorite scenes is eventually they do meet up again with Bucky, and Bucky is not pleased at all to see Steve. Actually, the summary comes from their initial interaction, and it's when Steve is in DC jogging, and in Winter Soldier, it's where he meets Sam Wilson. In this fic, it's where he meets Sam Wilson and Bucky. So he comes upon them and he goes, "Sergeant Barnes?" "Oh, hell no, don't call him that, man," Sam warned. "Captain, fuck off!" Barnes shouted over him. "Fight me!" Which pretty well illustrates what he thought of Steve. Bucky and Sam end up joining the Avengers, and Bucky is still not super pleased with Steve, but eventually they work together and a series of events happens and he loses his arm and gets a metal arm. And my favorite scene comes directly after that, and but he had finally gotten back into fighting shape, and Steve was watching the shape of his fighting quite aggressively right now. Head cocked, lips parted, not blinking for fear of missing a single move, as Bucky and Natasha whirled across the mats together. They both used their thighs around the neck liberally, and that arm was a work of goddamn art, forming itself to match Bucky's other well-muscled shoulder perfectly. Clint came up to stand beside Steve, cocking his head at the exact same 35-degree angle as Steve's. "Is there such a thing as a metal arm kink?" Steve shook his head. "Don't look at me right now." "Yeah, same," Clint said distractedly. He walked off whispering what sounded like, "Sweet baby cheeses." It's a riot. It ends up as a very sweet kind of get together for Bucky and Steve. They end up being everything that you hope they are. It has a wonderful use of Deus Ex Machina, and it manages to sort of naturally slip into a slightly more serious tone before coming right back out of that and going back to goofy. So I love it to death, and if you need a really good hearty laugh, I would recommend this every time.
Oh my god, I seriously need to read that fic. Okay.
Please do.
Final one of the episode, final fic rec of the episode.
Congratulations, everybody who made it this far.
Yes, you are golden. So, if you're going to read any fic that I have wrecked during this episode, this is the one you need to read, okay? It's titled Instructions Not Included by Atalan. It is a Good Omens Ineffable Husbands AU. Or actually, no, it's canon compliant. I know. I am wrecking 2 Good Omens fics. But Good Omens authors it's some of the best fic I've ever read, ever. This is probably in the top 10 for me. Okay, let me read you the summary. 1 year after the apocalypse that wasn't, Crowley and Aziraphale have settled into a new routine, keeping an eye on supernatural happenings in the world and preventing heaven or hell from interfering too much with humanity. It's not a bad job, despite occasional rains of fish, and if there were some unspoken things they really ought to talk about, well, they have all the time in the world now to get around to that, right? At least until the Archangel Raphael turns up on their doorstep looking for help, and it starts to become clear that the world is changing fast, and so are they. Or, Crowley and Aziraphale start a detective agency. Shenanigans ensue. Slow burn continues. Apparently, there is plot. I have some thoughts about heaven, hell, and humanism. There will be stupid jokes and a healthy sprinkling of angst. They're not stupid jokes. It's a fucking hilarious fic. I think I'm just going to read the quote. The office was a big old room in a big old building in Mayfair with high ceilings and elegant plaster molding. The maps went right up to the ceiling, filling spaces that shouldn't, technically speaking, be reachable without a ladder, which they did not have. Even so, they were running out of space. The whole office was the same. It had started out rather stylish, with its impressive mahogany desks, leather seats, and air of quiet authority. Crowley had brought along the world's most over-engineered coffee machine and a spider plant with PTSD. Aziraphale had contributed a shelf of impressive-looking leather-bound books and a rack containing more kinds of tea than Crowley had even known existed in the world. It was all lost now under a sea of paper. It didn't help that both of them had a tendency to assume that they would just find what they needed when they needed it, a bad habit like paying by check or believing firmly that one-way streets were for other people. Aziraphale's desk was at least sorted into piles of varying sizes. Crowley's was where post-it notes went to die. So, that's from chapter 1. It is a continuation of the book, and it is almost a gen fic, and so funny. If you didn't know that the author was shipping Aziraphale and Crowley beforehand, you might not know that it is an ineffable husband's fic. They don't really get into it. They don't start a relationship or anything like that. It's only 1 year after, the whole almost dying thing. And they are beings that have been around for thousands of years. So It wouldn't be quick, in my opinion, them getting together. So it works with my headcanons, but oh my god, they have to deal with so many funny, unusual creatures and happenings, and it's a little dark, but it's so realistic. It feels like something that would happen to them after what happens to them in the original book or the TV show that just came out. I love it with all of my heart. I need you guys, whoever is listening to this, I need you to read this if you love Good Omens.
You said that, well, it says in the summary that they're detectives. Are they detectives like ordinary people could walk into their shop and have problems fixed? Or
Yes.
detectives like they have a clientele primarily composed of angels and demons who have problems what need fixing?
So it's actually primarily humans who are dealing with supernatural. The first chapter is them getting a phone call from somebody, and it's like, oh yeah, Ronald has been turned into a frog. And Crowley's just like, fuck, this is the fourth one this month. And it's just like, it goes between the point of perspective between Crowley and Aziraphale really well, and it brings along some new fun human characters that are OCs from the author, and it also brings in Raphael, who isn't a character in the book or the TV show. So they kind of get to do whatever they want with that character, and Raphael wasn't part of the whole, like, wanting humans to die, or wanting the demons to die, but therefore humans die as well. And they get to, like, mess with Aziraphale and Crowley a whole lot, and there's a dog of the moor, or a black hound, and he's a really good boy. He makes me so happy. There are a couple chapters with his perspective as a hellhound who lives on Earth. He doesn't live in the hell. And I don't want to spoil this fic for people who are listening, because it's truly the fic I want them to read. All the rest of them are really good that I have wrecked. Obviously, they wouldn't be on here if they weren't good enough. But Instructions Not Included is like, I would read an entire book series devoted to Aziraphale and Crowley being detectives for the supernatural. And sometimes they are detectives for angels who are dealing with supernatural things. Because Raphael comes in and he's like, somebody stole my staff. He has a magic staff. And that's where the whole story goes. But this is the fic that you need to read, dear listener. You need to read it. It's so good.
So within the canon of Good Omens, we know for sure that there exist demons and angels and witches. But
Yes.
It sounds like this story premises that there's more than that going on.
No, actually, the main villain is a witch who is connected to demons somehow. I can't quite remember. Actually, I can't remember anything that is out of those bounds. The author really tried to make sure that this was a very plausible continuation of the story. So it's very canon compliant. It's easy to read too. It's only 68k. Good novel length. Get some tea during a thunderstorm and read it. I recommend. So that's it. The rec corner for this week doesn't exist because this entire episode is just recs.
I mean, we could come up with probably lots more recs for everyone, but if you've made it this far, you probably don't want any more.
So, good night, everybody.
I guess we'll see you next week
On Fangirls Anonymous. Bye!